Every currency that ever died took the middle class with it. Every single one. July 1946. Budapest. Erzsébet. Kovács walks 7 blocks to the Magyar Nemzeti Bank on Szabadság term. She carries a leather savings book in the same case her husband gave her before he shipped east in 1942. He did not return. She has carried the case every day since. She is 51. She has taught primary school for 22 years, raised 2 daughters alone in a 3rd-floor apartment in Pest, heating it with whatever wood she could find after the siege. She has never missed a deposit. Every month, without exception, a portion of her salary went into the savings book. 15 years of deposits. 15 years of discipline in a country that punished discipline with war, occupation, and famine. The teller opens the book. The number is there. Correct. Every pengo accounted for. Erzsébet asks to withdraw it all. The teller counts the bills and slides them across the counter. She stares at the stack. It is enormous, physically. A thick bundle of paper. She could wallpaper her kitchen with it. She walks to the market on Rákóczi út. A dozen eggs cost more than the entire stack. She stands at the stall holding bills that once represented 2 decades of teaching, and the vendor waves her away. He does not want the money. He would rather have her coat. The money was all there. It bought nothing. What happened to Erzsébet Kovács was not a bank failure, not a scam. The teller did not lie. The number in her book was accurate. The currency in which that number was denominated had lost its meaning. In July 1946, prices in Hungary were doubling every 15 hours. A loaf of bread cost more in the afternoon than it had that morning. By the next day, it cost more than it had the entire previous week. The Hungarian pengo did not decline. It evaporated. The government printed banknotes with denominations so large they exceeded the number of atoms in the observable universe. The highest denomination note ever issued, 100 quintillion pengo, could not buy a tram ticket by the time it reached circulation. The total value of every banknote in Hungary, every bill in every wallet and every vault, was worth less than 1,000th of a single American cent. And Erzsébet Kovács, who had saved for 15 years, who had never missed a deposit, who had done everything a responsible citizen was supposed to do, stood in a market holding paper that a vegetable seller would not accept. This is not a story about Erzsébet Kovács. This is a story about what happens to families when the numbers in their accounts stop meaning anything. It has happened 55 times since 1900, in countries with universities and parliaments and central banks and pension systems. Not a developing world anomaly. A documented, reliable structural pattern, and it follows the same survival hierarchy every time. This is Wealth Historian, where we document how money quietly changes hands. Today we examine the most violent form of that transfer, the kind that happens so fast, most families do not realize they have been destroyed until the morning they stand in a market holding money no one wants. Most people believe hyperinflation is something that happens somewhere else, in unstable countries, during wartime, under dictatorships. That is the comfortable version. The documented record says otherwise. Since 1900, at least 55 currencies have experienced hyperinflation. Germany, Hungary, Argentina, Brazil, Yugoslavia, Zimbabwe, Venezuela. Nations with educated populations, established legal systems, and functioning economies. Until one morning, they weren't. Hyperinflation is not a failure of the economy. It is a policy choice that reached its logical conclusion. Governments borrow more than they can repay. They instruct their central bank to print the difference. The currency absorbs the cost, and the first people to absorb that cost every single time, in every single country, are the ones who saved in that currency. That is not a coincidence. It is structural. The question is not whether currencies fail. They do. They have. They are failing right now in slow motion in ways most people cannot feel until the damage is already permanent. When they fail, who survives and who watches everything they save disappear? The answer, across every hyperinflation ever documented, is the same. It begins with who falls first. The first to fall are always the savers and the pensioners. Always. That is not opinion. It is the single most documented fact in the history of monetary collapse. In every hyperinflation, every one, the group that loses the most is the group that trusted the currency the most. In Hungary, Erzsébet Kovács was not unusual. She was the norm. The Hungarian middle class had done exactly what middle classes do in every developed country. They saved their income, paid their taxes, invested in government bonds, purchased life insurance. They trusted the system because the system had asked them to trust it. By July 1946, that trust was worth less than the paper it was printed on. The pengo's monthly inflation rate reached 41.9 quadrillion %. That number is not a typo. It is the official estimate from the Cato Institute's Henk Kruse World Hyperinflation Table. Prices doubled every 15.6 hours. A kilogram of bread that cost 10 pengo in the morning cost 20 by nightfall and 40 by dawn. The government introduced a parallel currency, the Ado Pengu, the tax pengo, whose value was adjusted daily by radio broadcast. The idea was to create a stable unit for tax payments. The Ado Pengo hyperinflated too. On August 1st, 1946, the pengo was replaced by the forint. The conversion rate, 1 forint for every 400 octillion pengo, a 4 followed by 29 zeros. Every person who had saved in pengu, every teacher, every nurse, every pensioner, every war widow, received, in exchange for their life savings, a number so close to zero it was mathematically indistinguishable from nothing. This was not unique to Hungary. In Weimar Germany, 1923, a retired man named Maximilian Bern withdrew his life savings. According to the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, the amount, which once would have funded a comfortable retirement, could purchase exactly one subway ticket. He rode the train to the end of the line and walked home. There was nothing left to buy. That same year, the father of oil consultant Walter Levy collected a life insurance payout he had contributed to for 20 years. As documented by PBS, the payout, 2 decades of monthly premiums, was worth enough to buy a single loaf of bread. A loaf of bread for 20 years of financial discipline. That is the exchange rate the system offered to those who followed its rules. In Argentina, on December 1st, 2001, the mechanism was even more direct. The government did not wait for the currency to hyperinflate. It locked the vault. The corralito, Spanish for little corral, froze every bank account in the country. Families with dollar-denominated savings woke up to a new rule: withdrawals capped at 250 pesos per week. Then the government forcibly converted their dollar deposits into pesos at an artificial rate of 1.4 pesos per dollar. When the peso collapsed to 4 per dollar within weeks, families who had saved $45,000 found themselves holding the equivalent of $15,000. Not because the bank failed, because the government decided their savings were the cheapest source of emergency funding. One depositor, documented by Buenos Aires Times, lost $40,000 out of a $77,000 balance. Not to fraud, not to a crash, to policy. Savers are not protected by the system. They are the fuel the system burns. The cacerolazos began within days. Tens of thousands of Argentines in the streets of Buenos Aires, banging pots and pans outside banks that held their savings and would not return them. President de la Rua resigned on December 20th, fleeing the Casa Rosada by helicopter. The money did not come back. They did everything right. That was the problem. In every hyperinflation, savers fall first because they hold the one asset the government has unlimited power to devalue: cash, deposits, bonds, pensions. Every instrument denominated in the national currency becomes a claim on a promise the government has already decided to break. The decision was made long before the saver felt the consequence. By the time Erzsébet stood in the market holding worthless bills, the printing had been underway for months. The policy was already in motion. She just hadn't been told. But not everyone fell. In every collapse, a second group emerged. People who did not save better, but who moved faster. The difference was not wealth. It was velocity. In Weimar Germany, by autumn 1923, factories had stopped paying wages in marks entirely, They paid in coal, in bread, in sausages. Workers who still received cash had developed a behavior journalists called the payday sprint. The moment the pay envelope hit their hands, they ran. Not walked, ran. To the nearest store, the nearest market, the nearest vendor who would still accept marks. And they bought anything. Flour, soap, candles, nails. Anything that would hold value longer than the paper in their pockets. By the next morning, the same envelope would buy half as much. By the following evening, half again. Journalist Friedrich Kroner documented the absurdity. Wages shrank in real value during the walk from the payroll office to the shop. A man who stopped to tie his shoe lost purchasing power. Berlin resident Betty Skolem wrote to her son in 1923 that the stamp on her letter cost 15 million marks. She noted, with a precision that reads like gallows humor, it would cost double that in 2 days. Speed was survival. Hesitation was loss. The rules of thrift, save slowly, spend carefully, plan for the future, became the rules of destruction. Every hour a mark sat in a wallet, it lost value. Every day a family delayed a purchase, the price rose. The careful became the casualties. The impulsive survived. In Venezuela, the same pattern repeated with modern brutality. By 2018, the bolivar was losing value so fast that the government knocked 5 zeros off the currency and rebranded it the sovereign bolivar. It made no difference. Annual inflation exceeded 80,000% according to the Cato Institute. IMF projections put it above 1,000,000%. Families in Caracas stopped planning meals by the week. They planned by the hour. A chicken that cost 14.6 million bolivares on Monday morning cost more by Monday night. Workers ran to buy whatever groceries remained on shelves that emptied faster than they could be restocked. Those who could not spend fast enough adapted. Families raised pigs in apartments. They sold kitchen appliances, blenders, toasters, refrigerators, to buy rice. Children were pulled from school because bus fare exceeded what a family could justify when the same money could buy a meal. Over 7 million Venezuelans left the country. Those who stayed relied on remittances, dollars sent by relatives who had already fled, as the domestic economy ceased to function. In Zimbabwe, the mechanism reached its mathematical extreme. By November 2008, monthly inflation hit 79.6 billion%, according to the Cato Institute's Steve Hanke. The government issued a $100 trillion banknote. It could not cover bus fare. Rural communities abandoned currency entirely and traded livestock for medical care, education, and food. Those with access to US dollars or South African rand survived. Those without did not. The longer you held the currency, the more it extracted from you. But speed alone was not enough. In every hyperinflation, there were families who could not spend fast enough, who could not run to the market before prices changed, who did not have wages to convert into goods, and some of them survived anyway. They used something else entirely. They left the system. In Weimar Germany, by late 1923, the formal economy had split in two. The visible economy, wages, prices, bank accounts, operated in marks that lost value by the hour. The invisible economy, the one that actually fed families, operated in objects. Adam Ferguson documented it in When Money Dies. A kilo of potatoes was worth more than the family silver. A side of pork was worth more than the grand piano. Families who had spent generations acquiring beautiful things, porcelain, paintings, heirloom furniture, carried them to the countryside and traded them for food. A professor's library for a sack of flour. A widow's wedding ring for a week of eggs. This was not desperation the way most people imagine it. It was rational. The objects held value. The currency did not. The families who survived understood this inversion fastest. The number in their account was fiction. The chair in their dining room was real. In Hungary, the same pattern emerged. City dwellers in Budapest loaded carts with whatever they owned. Linens, coats, silverware, tools, and traveled to the agricultural villages outside the capital. They bartered directly with farmers. A tablecloth for a chicken. A set of kitchen knives for a bag of potatoes. The farmers had food. The city dwellers had objects farming families wanted, but could not buy. because buying required currency, and currency had ceased to exist in any meaningful sense. The government tried to impose order. It introduced the adopingo as a parallel unit of account, its value announced each morning by radio. The idea was to create one stable number in a sea of collapsing ones. For a few weeks, it worked. Then the adopingo began hyperinflating too. The government was trying to create trust by decree. The population had already decided trust was a luxury they could no longer afford. In Venezuela, the exit from the formal economy was starker. By 2019, more than 7 million Venezuelans had left the country, the largest displacement in the Western Hemisphere's modern history according to the United Nations. Those who stayed survived on remittances. Dollars sent by sons and daughters in Colombia, Peru, Chile, and the United States became the only reliable income for millions of families. The domestic economy, jobs, wages, prices, had become a performance. The real economy ran on transfers from abroad. For those without relatives overseas, survival meant informal trade, street vendors, urban farming, repair work paid in food or dollars, skills that could be bartered, mechanical repair, plumbing, electrical work, medical knowledge, became the most valuable assets a person could hold. Not savings, not credentials, not property titles. Skills. The ability to do something another person needed, in exchange for something you needed to eat. Ferguson documented something else about Weimar that rarely gets quoted. It was not just the economy that inverted. It was the moral order. He wrote that a prostitute in the family was better than an infant corpse. That theft was preferable to starvation. That warmth was finer than honor. Clothing more essential than democracy. Food more needed than freedom. This was not a collapse of character. It was a collapse of the system that had made character affordable. When money died, the rules that money had underwritten died with it. The families who survived understood that the rules had changed, not because society had failed, but because the currency that held society together had been taken away by the institution that was supposed to protect it. There was communal hatred which was new. There was social resentment which was new. There was bribery and corruption. That was new. Ferguson's words. The mechanism was not economic collapse. It was social decomposition caused by economic policy. In Argentina, the Corralito produced a different kind of exit. When the banks froze deposits, the middle class did not quietly accept it. The cacerolazos erupted in Buenos Aires, Córdoba, Rosario, and every major city. Thousands of families took to the streets nightly. The protests did not return the money. What they created was a network. Neighbors who had never spoken began organizing. Cooperative kitchens, community barter markets, informal lending circles. The infrastructure of institutional trust, which had collapsed overnight, was rebuilt at the neighborhood level within weeks. Some families left. A generation of educated Argentines emigrated to Spain, Italy, and the United States, carrying professional degrees that were suddenly worth more outside the country than inside it. Those who stayed learned to hold as little cash as possible in the banking system. They kept dollars in safes at home, under mattresses, in family networks. The structural lesson was permanent. More than 2 decades later, Argentines remain among the most cash-hoarding, institution-distrusting populations in the world. The damage was not just financial. It was psychological. An entire generation lost the ability to believe that a bank would return their money. That belief has not come back. The families who survived were not richer. They were faster. Not better savers, better abandoners. The skill that saved them was the willingness to stop believing in the very system they had spent their whole lives trusting. Saving is obedience. Survival is defection. Here is the structural truth beneath all of it. In every hyperinflation ever documented, the same hierarchy appears. It is not random. It is not cultural. It is mechanical. At the top, those who held foreign currency. Dollars, Swiss francs, pounds. Any unit of account tied to an economy that was not collapsing. These families did not need to barter. They did not need to sprint. They held their wealth in a currency their government could not print. In Weimar Germany, those with access to dollars lived comfortably while their neighbors starved. In Zimbabwe, dollar holders bought homes at a fraction of their pre-crisis value. In Venezuela, Families with dollar income continued eating, while bolivar holders sold their appliances for rice. Below them, those with tangible barterable skills. Farmers who grew food, mechanics who repaired machines, doctors who could treat the sick, electricians, plumbers, carpenters. Their labor had value independent of the currency. When money died, their work did not. Below them, those with community networks, families embedded in neighborhoods, churches, cooperatives, extended clans, people who could pool resources, share food, provide shelter, trust networks that replaced institutional guarantees. And at the bottom, always at the bottom, those who held nothing but cash savings in the national currency. The teachers, the civil servants, the pensioners, the people who had done everything their government asked them to do. Save, invest in bonds, pay premiums, trust the system. They fell last, and they fell hardest, because they waited the longest to abandon the one asset being destroyed by design. This is not a coincidence. It is structural. Hyperinflation transfers wealth from those who save in the currency to those who borrow in it, and the government is always the largest borrower. That sentence deserves to be read twice. When a government borrows in its own currency, and then inflates that currency, the real value of its debt shrinks. The citizens who hold that currency, in savings accounts, in pension funds, in government bonds, absorb the cost. Their purchasing power is transferred to the borrower. The government did not default. It did not declare bankruptcy. It made the money worth less and called it monetary policy. Now, consider where you are standing. The United States dollar has lost more than 97% of its purchasing power since the Federal Reserve was created in 1913. That is Bureau of Labor Statistics data. $1 in 1913 buys roughly 3 cents of goods today. Cumulative inflation exceeds 3,200%. In June 2022, U.S. inflation hit 9.1%, the highest in 40 years. By the end of 2023, consumer prices were roughly 20% higher than before the pandemic. The rate slowed. The prices did not come back down. They never do. The average savings account in the United States pays 0.45% interest. Inflation in 2024 ran at 2.9% according to BLS data. Every dollar sitting in a savings account lost more than 2% of its purchasing power in a single year. Not by accident, by design. The Federal Reserve's explicit target is 2% inflation per year. That target means your savings are supposed to lose 2% of their value annually. That is the policy. It has a name. It is called price stability. $100,000 in a savings account at 2% annual inflation loses roughly $50,000 in purchasing power over 35 years. Not through a crash, not through fraud, through the mechanism working exactly as designed, slowly, quietly, by policy. Your savings account is denominated in the one asset your government has unlimited power to devalue, and it already has by 97%. The U.S. national debt now exceeds $36 trillion. The government is the largest borrower in the history of the world. Every borrower benefits from inflation. Every single one. Think about what that means for someone watching this tonight. If you put $100,000 into a savings account at age 30, and inflation runs at the Federal Reserve's target rate of 2%, by the time you reach 65, that money will buy you what $49,000 buys today. You did not spend it. You did not invest it poorly. You saved it, and the system took half of it. Not through a crisis, not through a collapse, but through the slow, steady, deliberate mechanism of monetary policy that your government calls stability. That is the American version. It is not as fast as Hungary. It is not as dramatic as Argentina. But the direction is not losing value. It is being devalued. The difference between those two sentences is the difference between an accident and a policy. This is not speculation. It is arithmetic. It is now August 1946. The forint arrives. Crisp, numbered, backed by the promise of a new economic order. 1 forint equals 400 octillion pengo. Elizabeth Kovacs takes her savings book to the bank one final time. The teller performs the conversion. 15 years of monthly deposits. 15 years of walking 7 blocks to the Magyar Nemzeti Bank, of choosing not to buy a new coat, of choosing not to repair the window, of choosing to save, convert to a sum so small it does not register as a meaningful amount in the new currency. She is not angry. The anger came months ago. By August, she has already given away most of what she owned. She traded her husband's bookshelf for flour in May, her mother's curtains for cooking oil in June, her winter coat, the one the market vendor wanted, for potatoes in July. She has already exited the system, not by choice, by necessity. She still teaches. She will teach for another 11 years, retiring in 1957. Her pension will be modest. She will never fully trust a bank again. Elizabeth Kovacs did not lose her savings because she was foolish. She did not lose them because she was reckless, or ignorant, or unlucky. She lost them because she saved in a currency her government had already decided to destroy. The decision was made in budget meetings and central bank offices and military requisition orders, months and years before the consequences reached her savings book. She was not consulted. She was not warned. She was not given an alternative. The system did not fail. The system transferred, from those who saved to those who borrowed, from the middle class to the state, from the careful to the connected. That is the mechanism. It is not new. It is not exotic. It operates in every currency on Earth, at every moment, in varying degrees. The only difference between Elizabeth's Hungary and your savings account today is the speed. Hers moved at 15 hours per doubling. Yours moves at 2% per year. The direction is the same. The question is not whether your currency will lose value. It already is right now, while you are watching this. The question is whether you will recognize the pattern before the hierarchy decides your position for you. What protects you during inflation? Your savings or your salary? Think carefully. The documented answer, across every collapse in the last century, is neither. If that kind of clarity matters to you, subscribing is the simplest way to see what's coming. The pattern has already started. Now you know where to look.